the key to her heart. The first time Officer Maya Chen saw a prisoner, phrase van 892 through the reinforced glass of cell block D, she didn't know that this woman with haunted eyes and trembling hands would become the person who would break down every wall she had ever built around her heart. The intake form said her name was Sarah Mitchell, convicted of vehicular manslaughter after a drunk driver had swerved into her lane, causing her to crash into another vehicle. 3 years into a 7-year sentence, Sarah sat on the edge of her bunk with her shoulders hunched forward like someone trying to make herself disappear, and Maya felt something shift inside her chest that she couldn't explain and didn't want to acknowledge. Maya had been working at Riverbend, women's correctional facility, for nearly 6 years, long enough to know that you never let yourself care too much. Never let yourself see the inmates as anything more than case numbers and security risks. She had built her career on professionalism and distance, on maintaining the clear line between those who wore the uniform and those who wore the orange jumpsuits. But from that very first day, something about Sarah was different. Maybe it was the way she kept her head down during meals, or the way she spent hours in the library reading poetry instead of the romance novels most inmates favored. Or maybe it was simply the profound sadness that seemed to radiate from her, like heat from asphalt on a summer day. Whatever it was, Maya found herself watching Sarah more than she should, noticing things she had no business noticing, like the way Sarah's hands shook when she held her dinner tray, or the silent tears that sometimes slipped down her cheeks during the evening count. The months passed slowly in the way that time always moves in prison, each day bleeding into the next with monotonous similarity. Maya conducted her rounds, filed her reports, broke up fights, and supervised meals with the same mechanical efficiency she had always maintained. But now there was an undercurrent to her days, a constant awareness of where Sarah was and what she was doing. She told herself it was just concern for a particularly vulnerable inmate, nothing more than the protective instinct any good officer would feel. She ignored the way her heart rate quickened when she saw Sarah in the yard, and she definitely ignored the dreams that had started to creep into her sleep, dreams where the bars and walls didn't exist and Sarah smiled at her the way she had never smiled in real life. It was during a particularly brutal winter storm, when the heating system in cell block D had failed and the temperature had dropped to near freezing, that something finally broke between them. Maya was doing her rounds at 2 in the morning when she found Sarah curled up on her bunk, shivering so violently that the thin mattress was shaking. Without thinking, without considering the rules or the cameras or the consequences, Maya grabbed the emergency blanket from the guard station and brought it to Sarah's cell. She stood outside the bars for a long moment, knowing that what she was about to do crossed a line, knowing that she should just call maintenance and move on. But Sarah looked up at her with those dark, desperate eyes, and Maya couldn't walk away. She unlocked the cell, stepped inside, and wrapped the blanket around Sarah's shoulders with hands that were surprisingly gentle. Sarah had looked at her then with an expression that Maya would never forget, a mixture of gratitude and confusion and something else, something that made Maya's breath catch in her throat. They didn't speak, didn't say a single word, but in that moment of shared warmth and kindness, something fundamental shifted between them. Maya left the cell and locked it behind her, but she took with her the memory of Sarah's skin beneath, her fingertips, and the way their eyes had met in the dim light of the emergency backup system. She knew, even as she walked away, that she had just crossed a threshold from which there would be no easy return. After that night, the small gestures began. Maya would leave an extra portion of fruit on Sarah's meal tray when no one was looking, or she would assign Sarah to library duty instead of the laundry detail that she hated. These were small things, easily explained away as random chance or standard rotation, but they both knew the truth. And Sarah, for her part, began to respond in the only ways available to her. She would smile at Maya during the morning count, just a small upturn of her lips that no one else would notice, but that made Maya's entire day feel brighter. She started leaving small origami figures, made from magazine pages in the common area where Maya would find them during her rounds, delicate birds and flowers that Maya would slip into her pocket and take home, treasures she would never admit to keeping. The danger of what was growing between them became impossible to ignore when Officer Rodriguez, one of Maya's colleagues, made a crude comment about Sarah during a staff meeting. He had called her a waste of space and suggested that inmates like her who showed signs of depression should just be locked in, solitary to save everyone the trouble of their constant neediness. Maya had felt rage surge through her body with such intensity that she had actually stood up from her chair, her hands clenched into fists, ready to defend Sarah with a violence that shocked even herself. She had caught herself just in time, forcing herself to sit back down and swallow the words that wanted to pour out of her. But in that moment, she had to face the truth she had been avoiding for months. This wasn't just concern for a vulnerable inmate. This was something far more dangerous, something that could destroy her career and Sarah's already limited future. This was love. The realization terrified Maya in ways she had never experienced before. She had dated men throughout her 20s, had even been engaged once to a fellow officer who had transferred to another facility, but she had never felt anything like this. Overwhelming need to protect and care for another person. This desperate longing to simply be in the same room as someone, to hear their voice and see them smile. She started avoiding Sarah, switching her routes during rounds, taking extra shifts in different cell blocks, anything to create distance between them. But it was useless because even when she wasn't physically near Sarah, she was thinking about her constantly, worrying about whether she was eating enough, whether she was being harassed by other inmates, whether she was managing to find any small moments of peace. In the brutal monotony of prison life, Sarah noticed the change immediately, and it devastated her in ways that Maya couldn't have predicted. Without the small kindnesses that had become her lifeline, Sarah began to withdraw even further. She stopped going to the library, stopped eating properly, stopped doing anything but lying on her bunk and staring at the ceiling. The other officers noticed and made jokes about her depression getting worse, but Maya saw the truth. She was the cause of Sarah's pain, and the knowledge of that was almost unbearable. It forced Maya to confront what she really wanted, what she was willing to risk for the possibility of something real and true in a world that seemed designed to crush anything genuine and soft. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, when Maya was supervising the outdoor recreation period. Sarah was sitting alone on a bench near the fence, looking so small and lost that Maya's chest physically ached. Without allowing herself to think about the cameras or the other officers or the rulebook that governed every aspect of her professional life, Maya walked over and sat down beside her. They sat in silence for several minutes, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, close enough that Maya could hear Sarah's breathing become unsteady. Then Sarah spoke for the first time in weeks, her voice barely above a whisper, and said that she understood if Maya needed to stay away, that she knew how impossible and dangerous this was, but that these past few months had been the only time since her conviction that she had felt like a human being, instead of a number. She said that Maya's kindness had reminded her that she was still worthy of compassion, still capable of feeling something other than shame and regret, and that even if nothing could ever come of these feelings, she needed Maya to know what a difference she had made. Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes as she listened, felt the weight of every rule and regulation she was violating pressing down on her shoulders. But she also felt something else, something stronger than fear or professional obligation. She felt the certainty that some connections transcend the circumstances that create them, that sometimes love appears in the most unlikely places and that denying it doesn't make it disappear. It only makes everyone involved suffer needlessly. She reached out and took Sarah's hand, a touch that lasted only seconds but conveyed everything that words couldn't express. She told Sarah that she understood the impossibility of their situation, that she knew the risks and the consequences, but that she refused to give up on the one genuine connection she had ever felt. She promised that she would find a way to make this work, even if it meant sacrificing everything she had built. If you're still watching this story, if Sarah and Maya's impossible love has touched something in your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that remind us that love exists even in the darkest places. And your support helps share these stories with others who need to hear them. The months that followed were a careful dance of stolen moments and whispered conversations. Maya learned to navigate the surveillance systems, to find the blind spots where the cameras couldn't reach. She arranged her schedule to maximize the time she could spend near Sarah's cell block, and she began advocating for Sarah in ways that seemed professional, but were motivated entirely by love. She pushed for Sarah to be enrolled in the facility's college program, arguing that inmates with higher education were less likely to reoffend. She recommended Sarah for a position in the prison library, where they could exchange meaningful glances across rows of books and sometimes share a few words about literature that were really about everything else they couldn't say. She became Sarah's fierce protector, intervening when other inmates tried to take advantage of her quiet nature, filing reports against guards who showed any sign of mistreatment. Sarah blossomed under this care in ways that astonished everyone who knew her. The broken, hollow-eyed woman who had entered Cell Block D began to transform into someone who smiled occasionally, who participated in group discussions, who started writing poetry that the prison literary magazine published. The other inmates noticed the change and began to gravitate toward her, seeing in her transformation evidence that redemption was possible even in this place designed to punish rather than heal. Maya watched this metamorphosis with pride and love, knowing that Sarah had always possessed this strength and light but had needed someone to believe in her enough to help her find it again. Their love, impossible and forbidden as it was, had become a force of healing rather than destruction. But they both knew that this fragile happiness couldn't last forever within the confines of the prison system. Maya began researching legal pathways, looking for ways to advocate for Sarah's early release. She discovered that Sarah's case had several grounds for appeal, that her public defender had missed key opportunities during the trial, that character witnesses and expert testimony about the accident could potentially reduce her sentence. Maya started making phone calls during her off hours, reaching out to advocacy organizations and pro bono lawyers, building a case for Sarah's release with the same dedication she brought to everything involving the woman she loved. It was dangerous work that required her to be careful about not revealing the true nature of her interest. But Maya had discovered that love made you willing to take risks you never would have considered before. As Sarah's release date drew closer, thanks in part to the advocacy efforts that Maya had secretly orchestrated, they both had to face the reality of what would happen when the prison walls no longer separated them. Maya knew that she would have to leave her job, that any relationship between a former officer and a former inmate would be scrutinized and judged, that they would face discrimination and suspicion from a world that didn't understand how love could bloom in such an unlikely place. But she also knew, with a certainty that lived in her bones, that Sarah was worth every sacrifice. The job she would leave behind had only ever been a career. But Sarah represented the possibility of a real life, a genuine connection, a love that transformed rather than diminished. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something important. If you believe in the power of love to transcend circumstances, if you think that kindness and compassion matter even in the darkest places, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Tell me what this story meant to you, or share a time when love appeared in your life from an unexpected place. On the day Sarah walked out of Riverbend Women's Correctional Facility, Maya was waiting for her in the parking lot. No longer wearing the uniform that had defined her identity for so many years, she had submitted her resignation 2 weeks earlier, had walked away from the career she had built to embrace the uncertain future that love demanded. Sarah emerged through the prison gates carrying a single bag of belongings, looking both terrified and hopeful, and when she saw Maya standing there, her face transformed with a joy so pure and radiant that Maya knew she had made exactly the right choice. They didn't embrace immediately, both of them too aware of the cameras and the watching eyes. But they walked toward each other with purpose and certainty. They got into Maya's car and drove away from the prison that had both imprisoned and freed them, heading toward a future they would build together. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with judgment and obstacles and the weight of their unconventional beginning, but they had already survived the impossible, had already proved that love could exist even in the most restrictive circumstances. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together. Two women who had found each other in the last place anyone would expect, and who had discovered that the heart's capacity for love recognizes no walls, no rules, and no limitations. Their story wasn't ending as Sarah walked free. It was finally truly beginning,